we also are a very young population, right? So on average, we're 25 years old. We are going through our own demographic dividend these days. A higher percentage of our population is actually working age versus non-working age, which means that they are able to contribute to the economy more, which means that there's a larger base of consumers as well. So I think all of those different factors that I mentioned really make it a very interesting time to be an active participant in the startup ecosystem.
I agree with everything that Franco said, right? Like, I mean, we look at startups not just in the Philippines, but across the region. So I can definitely say that the fact that the Philippine startup scene is a bit maybe more nascent versus markets like Indonesia and Singapore has its challenges, but at the same time opportunities as well, right? Like valuations tend to be a bit more reasonable. I think there are obviously a lot of problems that can be solved by startups here. And like Franco mentioned, there's capital waiting to deploy. So yeah, the fact that it's a very consumer-focused country, more than any other country in the region, very good demographics. I think we're the only country in ASEAN whose median age is still actually hasn't peaked yet. So there's obviously a lot of potential for a very big consumer internet focused startups to make a play.
So I think Kat would have a lot of things to say.
Actually, I think they've covered a lot of it. I think there are two things that typically drive flywheel, so to speak, right? And the first thing is capital, and the second thing would be talent. And so on the capital end, it's already being discussed here, or by the two gentlemen, right? That there's so much interest. I mean, even just in this room, right? People are looking at the Philippines for, where the next cool thing is gonna come from. And even locally, the fact that we can fill a very big panel here of locals that are willing to cut those checks, first checks, early stage, all the way to, going up to the Series A, B, things like that, right? I think that piece is kind of getting solved, or, getting there. The second piece would be the talent, and I'm 100% a believer in the quality of talent in the Philippines. The big problems that can be solved, and that we can be the ones creating those solutions. I mean, something I feel very strongly about. And again, like, if we're willing to invest in ourselves, and I think we're seeing that now, we drum up enough attention so that other people see it too, and everything we have to offer, we're unstoppable. And then I guess the third kind of piece of the flywheel would be the government, of course, and the support and the incentives that are kind of being given. I think this year I haven't seen as much of a coordinated effort, right, to support the startup space. So, all of these things kind of working together in concert, I think is, recipe for success, right? So, yeah.
Actually, it's very nice to hear about the financing side. When we started back in 2016, we have to go to Singapore to raise capital. So if you can do it right now, I mean, that's really good.
I agree with everyone everything that everyone said. Actually, we covered most of the most important topics. One is the demographics. The other one is the capital flow coming in. Third is talent, but also infrastructure. I'd like also maybe perhaps add to, let's say, the demographic side is that if you look at least the Philippines compared to the rest of Southeast Asia, we're still quite the most well-educated, meaning having received more education and being able to be job-ready upon graduation. We are also a bit cheaper compared to the rest of Southeast Asia, which provides a lot of opportunities for us to get that talent. I think the bigger challenge at the moment is actually getting those talent into the startup space, and that is actually being driven more by, let's say, the capital coming in, bringing more attention to the space and whatnot. And also, maybe I just want to have a kind of also highlight the fact that this week we have the Philippine Startup Week, which really highlights the fact that, if you look at the Philippine Startup Weeks from 5 years ago, where there's really a few people, having now an entire week with many different activities run by the communities, not only in Manila, but also Bohol and elsewhere. It highlights the fact that the growth of, let's say, the startup space is quite, there's this big momentum happening, and I think that will bring in more capital, and it's quite exciting to see.
Topher?
I want to resonate with what Franco said about just the event. So my team even had to split up because this is happening, and then there's a lot of really cool events happening in the area. And I think about 10 years ago, so I just relocated back in the Philippines about 3 months ago. I don't think these events existed like that prominently back then. So to see it now, it's really quite encouraging. So that's probably an anecdotal way to put that. The other way I'll kind of put a flavor to it. So I lived in Cambodia and Malaysia and Singapore for the last 10 years. And I would say the Philippines is quite an interesting spot because if I were to kind of plot that on a line in a spectrum, I think Cambodia is a little bit more frontier in terms of the market. Singapore is probably a bit more saturated and mature. Philippines is in a good sweet spot in the middle that, as someone already said about also our talent, like there's a lot of really talented people and you don't have to, not to encourage like, cheap labor, like that's how I'm talking about, but like there's a lot of like, you can really get good talent without having to pay super expensive. And that's a prime driver for a lot of investments. So I think our existence in the Philippines is a good example. Like we're quite in a risky stage because we're focusing on pre-seed and an idea. We're giving you $500,000 and then you don't have anything. In 3 months we're gonna want you to have an MVP after that. So that's very risky. You can pretty much just run away with that $500,000 and it's gone, right? So, but the confidence that we have in the talent in the Philippines, in the growing ecosystem, I think we've been ranked as top 20 of the global, a top 20 global ecosystem in the world according to Startup Genome. So I think all of these sort of kind of coming together now, like the government support, the communities here, and specifically capital is like kind of waiting to just come into the Philippines. So I think this is like, as someone said, it's a good recipe for a budding, and I think we're only seeing it. I think it's only even starting now. I think it's not even. I think it's more exciting to see in the next couple of years how this is going to mature. So I think it's just more excitement in the startup community here in the Philippines.
Another good thing to note too is the European Union and the US is actually looking into the Philippines now. But unlike the last 6 years, the previous administration was more China-centric. So I think that's a good news too that the DTI is really working hard to open us up to more investors from the European Union. So another thing that on the other side, what do you think are the challenges? You mentioned infrastructure. One thing that I had a discussion with ABB yesterday is that they said that the power cost is quite expensive here for data centers to be put up. So what do you think is our country doing about it in the private sector? Anyone?
I mean, also just jumping off of your statement from the ABB, actually they just released also last May 2000 this year the report on, let's say, what is the difficulties and challenges of the startup space. Number one, about 62% actually still say that raising capital is the main challenge, which is also on a positive side. We see that if you look at just the number of, let's say, VCs looking at the Philippines, in 2020 we had around 40 VCs that have invested in the Philippines. For the first half of 2023, we already have 56, so that's an increase of amount of VCs actually putting in capital, which shows a lot of, let's say, vibrancy in the ecosystem. Another one, which also 62% of the, let's say, respondents from that survey, Philippine-wide of startups, is that they also still have a challenge with talent. So I'll let the other speakers or at least speak on that, but one thing I want to add also is from last year's survey of, let's say, the PwC on the startup ecosystem in the Philippines, about 44% of, let's say, startup actually mentioned that what they need also is a lot of business mentorship. And that's where a lot of, let's say, the government could come in, let's say, partnering with public and private, and also international partners could bring in experts and also knowledge into, let's say, the space. And if that knowledge gets actually distributed to, let's say, more of the startups and more of the ecosystem, it could actually bolster a lot more growth for the space.
Actually, maybe I can jump quickly on that one. I like the conversation on talent particularly because I think there's a little bit of a cultural aspect to it. Like, for example, if you look at people from top universities in the Philippines, and if you survey them, I've never done a survey, but I'm guessing if you've surveyed them, I don't think joining a startup will be the number one thing that will pop up in their minds, right? Like, it's almost like a lot of them are brainwashed to go corporate, and the reason being, my thesis is that because there's not enough role models yet, like homegrown role models yet, that they can say, okay, I look up to these people and I want to be like them someday. Because so as we grow the ecosystem and we have more of these success stories, I think that cultural risk of like kind of jumping to do a startup becomes a little bit less. right? So, and this is why for us as a venture builder or incubator, we love doing that because then we kind of grow the talent not just for investing purposes, but also just to grow the ecosystem in general. So I think there's something that we'll probably see a bigger shift culturally. The more startups become widely known in the country and more success stories come out. So
yeah, maybe just to build a little bit on what you've both talked about, right? Like, I think again, the capital and the talent are sort of the essential building blocks, and I suppose what I was suggesting earlier is that it's trending in the right direction, but there are definitely still challenges on both those fronts. So let's say while there's a lot of capital that's coming in or looking at the Philippines, it's still, I mean, as a more on like wearing my incubator hat, I suppose, right? Like, it's still not necessarily uniformly distributed, or kind of there are still many opportunities to develop, right? Other groups, especially kind of homegrown, truly homegrown kind of talent, I want to say. Because I think what we have seen is that a lot of, more prominent success stories so far have been, like the sea turtles, right? Like the return, people that have gone overseas for a while, or even kind of founders that have moved here, right? But I think that kind of also works in with the talent piece, right? So while we do have very educated people relatively, I think, you mentioned Vietnam at the beginning of this talk, right? Like our developer talent pool here is, nothing. It's like maybe 10x there what it is here now, right? If you think about whether people aspire to be founders, right? Are the best of the Filipinos like wanting or finding it aspirational to enter this space? Again, it's trending in the right direction, but I wouldn't necessarily say that we're there yet, right? And I guess in terms of just other challenges, definitely a lack of role models is one, right? Like I think we need to, as a community, be talking more about what the opportunities are here. Like we have to believe it first, I think, before we can convince the world to. But like, again, there's still areas to improve in terms of the infrastructure. I mean, we're starting a lot of things. Like in the previous panel, the NDC has started to deploy their startup venture fund, right? But they've made their first investment, which was, by the way, in a electricity-related or energy sector startup, right? But again, we're still learning. We're in a way like just in that early part of that kind of picking up, right? So. And obviously, it's going to be tough while we're kind of
going back to the role models. Actually, in the US, there's a Filipina named Sheila Marcelo. So she put up care.com. So she's the first Filipina who listed in the New York Stock Exchange. So care.com is like an Airbnb or something like a job board for caregivers. So it became a success in the US. But again, she was successful as a Filipina based in the US. So I think if the diaspora can come back and really help promote, that would be great. So any more insight?
I think that's a good point, right? The diaspora coming back and helping promote, right? If you actually look at our portfolio at Foxmont, we've actually invested in, again, 39 different companies, and we looked at where our founders came from, right? And roughly about 30% are actually expats that have found second homes here in the Philippines and are contributing in that way. They love the Philippines for one reason or another. They've done some business here previously, and now they're starting their businesses here. And I think that's pretty cool. Like they're able to bring some of their foreign knowledge into our shores, right? Everybody always talks about brain drain. This was a very popular term in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s. But I like to say that we're going through a brain regain, actually, brain gain. And that's also shown by the rest of our portfolio, right? So 30%, 33% of it is also sea turtles, right? So Filipinos that were born abroad, potentially children of Filipinos working abroad, educated abroad, and then coming back home and starting their businesses. There are some great examples of that within our own portfolio. One very prominent one would be Kumu, right, for example. Also, of course, Filipinos that were educated abroad, born here, educated abroad, and came back. Another good example of that would be Pick Up Coffee, for example. And the last 33%, which is a growing number, are locally educated Filipinos that have basically found inspiration, have found the opportunity to build their businesses, that have found that little crack of availability of capital that have determined what the problems are in this country because they've lived through it and are now addressing it directly. So I do think that with challenges comes opportunity, right? So Kat made a great example of that. You had previously mentioned power as a difficulty in terms of manufacturing in this country. Well, yeah, there's a company that the NDC, the Startup Venture Fund, has invested in, co-invested with us at Foxmont, called SolX, locally educated, locally born and raised Filipinos that said, listen, we need to address this power problem immediately. And that's what they're doing.
That's great. So we only have 4 minutes left. So maybe any last words from you guys? So start from you.
Actually, I don't think the government needs much advice. I think they're on the right track. Like, I'm really excited about the Startup Venture Fund. We quite have a partnership with the Bataan government, and actually, I only found out about this yesterday that the Bataan Free Port, if you register there, you get like 4 to 8 like tax incentives. Like that's amazing. Basically, if you register our startups there, like they don't have to worry about paying taxes. So I think the government is doing the right things, and in conjunction that I think the ecosystem has been growing. I think we have enough people you could go to ask for capital, for mentorship. I think we have a very supportive ecosystem as well. Like I think people help out each other. Would love to get to know more of them. I'm really new. I've just been here for 3 months, so I think this is good networking for me already because I'm meeting them here. But yeah, I think we're all here to support entrepreneurship. I think entrepreneurship is really hard, and when you're doing something really hard, it takes a lot of courage to do it, and sometimes when you're doing it together with other people, it's a lot easier to do it. So I think we should just keep going with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Rene?
First, because HU Lab is more of a venture studio and really helps companies build from the ground up, a lot of the things that we experience is really more on operational challenges of, let's say, startups and whatnot. What I would like to comment, for example, for the government, but maybe it's also an offshoot from, let's say, the pandemic, is that even for everything that's related to registration or everything that's related that is paper-based before has gone quite digital, and that's something that's quite commendable with the recent administration. Also, another aspect that maybe perhaps they want to explore. I was yesterday in a panel of, let's say, really one of the some of the most prominent startups in the Philippine startup space. There is a lot of, let's say, national level support and programs and funds. For that, we have the Philippine Venture Fund, we have the DOST and the DTI and DICT also have, let's say, different grants that they provide equity-free for startups. However, a lot of our regional and also other startups that are not in Metro Manila might not know the LGU level initiatives that are available. That's not to say that there's none. For example, he has highlighted already that there are things happening in Bataan, but I think if there's also access to that information that is supporting, let's say, of startups in, let's say, LGUs, that's really going to bring up more of the interest for, let's say, non-NCR-based startups to also start coming up. Other than that, I think we're on the right track.
I don't think I can give advice really to the government, but I agree with the sentiment that they're on the right track. We're, at the legislative level, at even the local government, the regional government, and of course, the national agencies, right? Like the level of awareness about startups and the issues around this ecosystem, I think has never been higher than in this in the current government. What I will say though is that timing is everything, especially for startups, right? Like, the right idea at the right time and acting and executing, right, with speed and kind of efficiency is key. So I think the time for the Philippine startup ecosystem is right now, and we all have to act now. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with everyone. I mean, we're quite bullish on the local ecosystem. I think just talking about capital, maybe one thing is that there is capital available, but maybe not uniformly across like the life cycle of a startup, right? So our regional investors, even like us, we typically come in once the startup is more developed. So I think it's great that a lot of the people on this stage actually are helping kind of bridge that gap from idea to a viable startup. But there's definitely, I think, more that can be done by the public sector there, just in terms of ensuring, similar to other markets in the region, that there's adequate access to very early stage capital for great founders who have ideas, products that they want to start, but maybe just don't have the backing to do it.
Franco, last 10 seconds.
12 seconds, okay.
I saw Secretary Fred Pascual come to the back, Secretary of DTI, of course. So my advice to the government, I don't have any. It's perfect. I love the government. The DTI is doing a great job, USEC. But what I do have to say is that we're seeing is a lot more participation from the government, and that's great, right? Vis-a-vis the organization, the DTI, the DICT, and the DOST, all working together hand in hand to really help promote the Philippine startup ecosystem. That's something we've never seen before in the past, right? The NDC, the National Development Company, now managing the Startup Venture Fund, directly investing into startups. That's also something we've never ever seen in the past. So you have the government, you have the foreign investors that I was talking about earlier, you have the demographic dividend, and to Kat Chan's point, now is the time for you all to participate.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.